The darkness of space stretched endlessly in every direction as the human star cruiser Horizon moved through the Andara sector on its monthly survey. Route Captain Maya Torres sat in her command chair reviewing mineral reports from the previous scan when the alarm cut through the quiet hum of the bridge. Every screen flashed red and a distress beacon signal pulsed across the navigation display. Lieutenant Hannah Price jumped into action at her scanner station, and her fingers moved quickly over the controls as she tried to identify the source. The signal was coming from a debris field about 2 kilometers ahead, and it was weak, but definitely there. Maya leaned forward and studied the readings with concern, growing in her chest. Something had gone very wrong out here in the emptiness between star systems. She ordered the crew to approach the debris field with extreme caution, because unknown situations could turn dangerous in seconds. The Horizon slowed its speed and moved carefully. Between floating chunks of twisted metal and shattered hull plating, Hannah worked her scanners harder, and suddenly her face went pale as new data appeared on her screen. She looked up at Maya with shock in her eyes and reported that there were life signs in the wreckage. The readings were faint and growing weaker by the minute, but something was definitely alive in that mess. Maya did not waste a single second, and she immediately ordered a rescue operation. The crew had trained for emergencies like this, and they moved with practice speed. Dr. Lisa Morgan gathered her medical team and prepared the sick bay for whatever they might find. Corporal Amy Zhang suited up with the security team and checked her equipment twice within 10 minutes. The away team was ready, and they loaded into a shuttle that launched from the Horizon's main bay. Amy piloted the shuttle into the debris field and navigated carefully between the floating wreckage. The pieces looked like they had come from a vessel, design that nobody on the team recognized. The metal had a strange shimmer to it, and the hull fragments showed symbols in a language that the computer could not translate. Lisa kept her eyes on the life sign readings and directed Amy toward the strongest signal. They found it in what remained of a cargo bay that had somehow kept its atmosphere intact. The shuttle docked carefully, and the team cut through the damaged airlock with plasma torches. When they finally broke through and entered the cargo bay, everyone stopped and stared. In the corner, huddled together, were 3 creatures that looked like they had stepped out of ancient Earth legends. They were baby dragons with scales that shimmered between deep purple and bright silver in the shuttles. Lights, each one was about the size of a large dog, and they were pressed together for warmth. Their eyes were closed, and their small chests rose and fell with shallow breaths that came too slowly. Lisa rushed forward with her medical scanner and immediately checked their vital signs. The readings were bad, and the creatures were suffering from severe hypothermia and starvation. The cargo bay had been their prison, and their oxygen levels were dropping fast. She signaled to her team, and they carefully wrapped the dragon babies in thermal blankets. The creatures were too weak to resist, and they barely stirred as gentle human hands lifted them. Amy searched the rest of the wreckage for any other survivors, and what she found made her heart sink, floating in. What had been the ship's cockpit was the body of an elf woman. Her features were sharp and elegant, with high cheekbones and pointed ears. She wore armor made of a crystalline material that still glowed faintly with inner light. In her lifeless hand, she clutched a datapad, and Amy carefully retrieved it. The woman had been beautiful, and there was a peaceful expression on her face despite the violence of her death. Amy wondered what had happened here, and why this woman had been alone with 3 baby dragons in deep space. She returned to the cargo bay and helped the team carry the unconscious creatures back to the shuttle. They moved as quickly as safety allowed and launched back toward the Horizon. Inside the medical bay, Lisa and her team worked frantically to stabilize the 3 dragon babies. They set up warming units and started intravenous fluids to combat the dehydration. The creature's body chemistry was unlike anything in the medical database, but Lisa had years of experience with alien life forms. She adapted treatment protocols and monitored their responses carefully. Meanwhile, on the bridge, Maya examined the datapad that Amy had recovered from the dead elf woman. The ship's computer worked to translate the alien language, and slowly words began to appear on the screen. What Maya read made her grip the edge of her command console. The elf woman's name had been Silvara, and she was from a world called Thessara, in a system the human star charts did not show. Her people had been guardians of these dragons for thousands of years, but a plague had swept through their system 6 months ago, and it had been merciless. The disease killed quickly, and spread faster than anyone could stop. Within weeks, the entire population of Thessera had been infected. Silvera had been off-world when it started, and by the time she returned, everyone was gone. Her family and her friends and every person she had ever known were dead. The only survivors were these 3 dragon hatchlings, who had been in a protected sanctuary. Silvera had taken them and fled in her small ship. She had been trying to reach a sanctuary world where the dragons might be safe, but her ship had suffered a critical failure in its power systems. She had sent out a distress call and used the last of her energy to keep the cargo bay pressurized for the babies. The datapad contained detailed instructions for their care. It listed what they needed to eat, and how warm they needed to be, and how to handle them safely. At the end, Silvera had written a message to whoever might find them. She begged that they would protect these innocent lives. She wrote that the dragons were the last of their kind, and they deserved a chance to grow and thrive. She asked that they be loved and cared for even though they were predators by nature. Maya read the final words 3 times and felt tears sting her eyes. This woman had sacrificed everything to save 3 babies who were not even her own species. She had died, alone in the darkness of space, hoping that someone would come. And now the responsibility had fallen to humans. Maya made a decision in that moment that would change everything. She activated the ship-wide communication system and addressed her entire crew. She told them about Silvera, and about the dragons, and about the choice they now faced. They could report this to command and let bureaucrats decide what to do, or they could take responsibility themselves and make sure these babies survived. Response was immediate and unanimous. Every single crew member volunteered to help. Maya smiled and knew she had the best crew in the fleet. The Horizon changed course and headed toward the nearest supply station. They had 3 baby dragons to save, and they were not going to fail. The medical bay of the Horizon had never been so busy as Dr. Lisa Morgan, and her team worked around the clock to keep the 3 dragon hatchlings alive. The first 48 hours were critical, and nobody got much sleep during that time. Lisa studied Silvera's notes constantly, and cross-referenced them with every piece of data her scanners could provide about the creature's biology. The dragons needed a very specific mineral compound in their food, and their body temperature had to stay above 37 degrees Celsius at all times. The ship's synthesizers struggled to create the right nutrient mix, and it took dozens of attempts before Lisa found a formula that worked. The smallest dragon was the first to show improvement, and his vital signs slowly stabilized. His scales had a reddish tint mixed with the purple and silver, and Lisa noticed he responded to warmth better than the others. The largest dragon took longer to recover, and her breathing remained shallow for 3 full days. Her scales were predominantly silver, and they seemed to glow softly when the lights dimmed. The middle dragon fell somewhere between, and her darker purple coloring made her blend into shadows. By the end of the first week, all 3 were finally out of immediate danger. Captain Maya visited the medical bay every day and watched the progress with relief. She had sent reports to Earth Colonial Administration, but deliberately left out certain details about the dragon's intelligence. The bureaucrats did not need to know everything yet. Corporal Amy Zhang found herself drawn to the medical bay during her off-duty hours. She would sit quietly near the warming units and watch the dragons sleep. There was something peaceful about their tiny snores and the way their scales shimmered with each breath. The smallest dragon seemed to sense her presence and would shift closer to where she sat. One evening, Amy reached out carefully and touched his scales. They were warm and smooth like polished stone, and the dragon made a small chirping sound in his sleep. From that moment, Amy was completely attached. Lieutenant Hannah Price had a different approach, and she studied the dragons from a scientific perspective. She ran analysis after analysis, trying to understand their physiology and potential capabilities. The data suggested these creatures would grow to enormous size and develop abilities that defied normal physics. Their bone structure was incredibly dense, yet somehow light, enough for flight. Their internal temperature regulation system was more efficient than anything in nature. Hannah presented her findings to Maya and suggested they were dealing with a species that had been engineered or evolved far beyond natural limits. Maya listened carefully and made another decision. These dragons would need room to grow, and the Horizon was not big enough for what they would become. Dr. Lisa began the next phase of care, By introducing solid food to the dragon's diet, she started with small portions of the mineral-enriched paste she had developed. The smallest dragon ate eagerly and seemed to enjoy the taste. The largest dragon was more cautious and sniffed everything before trying it. The middle dragon surprised everyone by being extremely picky and refusing several batches before accepting one. Lisa laughed and said it reminded her of feeding her sister's kids back on Earth. As the dragons grew stronger, they began to move around the medical bay. At first, they just stretched and repositioned themselves. Then they started exploring their immediate surroundings with careful steps. The smallest dragon discovered he could climb, and soon he was scaling the equipment racks. The largest dragon tested her strength by pushing against the walls. The middle dragon figured out how to open the lower cabinet doors within 2 days. The crew started calling them by descriptive names to tell them apart. The smallest became Red because of his coloring and his energetic personality. The largest became Silver for her shimmering scales and protective nature. The middle became Shadow because she liked dark corners and quiet spaces. But Amy had different ideas and she started using other names when she visited. She called the smallest one Ember because his scales seemed to glow like hot coals when he was happy. She called the largest Nova because her silver scales reminded her of starlight. She called the middle one Ash because her dark purple coloring looked like smoke. The names stuck and soon the entire crew was using them. 3 weeks after the rescue, the dragons were healthy enough to leave the medical bay. The engineering team had converted one of the cargo bays into a habitat for them. They installed heavy-duty heating, lamps that kept the space warm. They built soft bedding areas from thermal materials. They created a feeding station with easy access to food and water. Most importantly, they added plenty of space for the dragons to move and play. When the dragons first entered their new home, they stood frozen at the entrance. Ember took the first brave step inside and looked around with wide golden eyes. Nova followed close behind and positioned herself between Ember and any potential threats. Ash slipped in quietly and immediately started investigating every corner. The crew watched through observation windows as the dragons explored. It was clear they were intelligent and curious about everything. Ember found a rubber ball that one of the engineers had left behind and he started pushing it around with his nose. Nova discovered she could see her reflection in a metal panel and spent 20 minutes studying herself. Ash figured out that she could stack storage containers to reach higher shelves. Dr. Lisa came to check on them several times a day and brought fresh food for each meal Corporal Amy visited whenever her security shifts allowed, and she always brought small toys or treats. Lieutenant Hannah recorded everything for her research logs and marveled at how quickly the dragons learned Captain Maya made it a point to spend at least an hour each day in the habitat. She would sit on the floor and let the dragons approach her at their own pace. Ember was always first, and he would climb into her lap and curl up for warmth. Nova would sit nearby and watch the door as if standing guard. Ash would investigate Maya's uniform pockets looking for anything interesting. One evening during Maya's visit, something remarkable happened. Ember was nestled against her and making his usual chirping sounds, but then the chirps changed and formed a pattern that sounded almost like words. Maya froze and listened carefully. Ember was trying to say Amy's name. The sounds were rough and scratchy, but the intention was unmistakable. Maya immediately called Lisa and Hannah to the habitat. They listened as Ember tried again and again to form the word. Each attempt got a little clearer. When Amy arrived for her next visit, Ember ran to her and made the sound that resembled her name. Amy dropped to her knees and tears streamed down her face. She hugged the little dragon carefully and he chirped happily in response. Over the next few days, the other dragons started attempting speech too. Nova learned to make a sound like safe whenever Hannah was present. Ash surprised Lisa by saying something that sounded very much like thank you during a feeding. The crew realized they were not just caring for intelligent animals. They were raising sentient beings who could think and feel and communicate. Maya updated her reports to Earth Colonial Administration with this new information. She also made a formal request for the dragons to be granted protected status as sapient life forms. She argued that these were not specimens for research but individuals deserving of rights and freedom. The response would take weeks to arrive, but Maya was not worried. She had already decided that no bureaucrat was going to take these babies away from her crew. The horizon continued its journey, and the dragons continued to grow. Each day brought new discoveries and new bonds between species, and somewhere in the darkness of space the spirit of Silvara could finally rest. Her babies were safe, and they were loved. The message from Earth Colonial Administration arrived exactly 3 weeks after Maya had sent her updated report about the dragon's ability to communicate. She sat in her ready room and read it twice before calling a meeting with her senior staff doctor. Lisa Morgan arrived first and took her usual seat across from Maya's desk. Lieutenant Hannah Price came next with a datapad full of recent observations about the dragons. Corporal Amy Zhang was last, and she looked worried because she could tell from Maya's expression that the news was not good. Maya did not waste time with small talk, and she told them that the administration wanted the dragons transferred to a research facility on Station Omega-7. The facility specialized in studying alien life forms, and the bureaucrats believed the dragons would receive better care there. But Maya had read between the lines of the official message. She knew that research facility meant the dragons would spend their lives in laboratories being studied and tested. The scientists would want to understand every aspect of their biology and psychology. The dragons would never know freedom, or the chance to fly in open skies. Amy stood up so fast her chair nearly fell over, and she said absolutely, not with fire in her voice. Hannah agreed and pointed out that the dragons had already bonded with the crew. Separating them now would cause psychological trauma. Lisa added that the facility had no experience with raising infant predators, and the dragons needed emotional connections, not just clinical care. Maya smiled because she had expected exactly this reaction from her team. She told them she had already sent a response declining the administration's request. She had cited the dragons' sapient status and argued they deserved to choose their own future. She had also mentioned that moving them during this critical development phase could be fatal. The administration would not be happy, but Maya had allies in high places. Admiral Patricia Wells had sent a private message supporting Maya's position. The admiral had a reputation for standing up to bureaucrats, and she believed in doing what was right over what was convenient. Maya's team relaxed a little, but they all knew this fight was not over. The administration could order Maya to comply, and refusing a direct order would end her career. But Maya had already made peace with that possibility. Some things were more important than careers down in the cargo bay habitat. The dragons were completely unaware of the political battle being fought over their future. Ember had grown noticeably larger in the past 3 weeks, and his personality had become even more playful. He loved to wrestle with the rubber ball and would chase it around the habitat for hours. His attempts at speech had improved dramatically, and he could now say several words clearly. Amy's name was his favorite, and he would call out to her whenever she entered. The habitat, Nova had become the protector of their little group, and she took her role seriously. Whenever a new crew member visited the habitat, Nova would position herself between them and her siblings. She had learned to say several words, including safe and home and crew. Hannah had bonded deeply with Nova and would spend hours sitting with the large silver dragon. Ash remained the quietest of the three, but she was clearly the smartest. She had figured out how to operate the automatic door controls by watching the crew. She could stack objects to reach high places, and she understood cause and effect better than seemed possible. Lisa had caught Ash several times trying to access the food storage lockers. The dragon had almost succeeded in figuring out the combination lock. Dr. Lisa had started a new program teaching the dragons basic concepts and communication. She used picture cards and simple words to help them expand their vocabulary. The dragons learned quickly and seemed hungry for knowledge. Ember learned the words for different foods and would request his favorites. Nova learned words related to safety and protection. Ash learned words for objects and actions and was constantly asking what things were called. The crew had fallen into a routine of caring for their unusual passengers. The kitchen staff prepared special meals 3 times a day. The engineering team maintained the habitat and made improvements based on the dragons' growing needs. The medical team conducted regular health checks and monitored development, and everyone took turns spending time with the dragons because the babies thrived on attention and interaction. One morning during a routine health check, Lisa noticed something unusual. All three dragons had small bumps forming along their shoulder blades. She scanned them carefully and realized these were the beginning of wing development. The dragons would be able to fly, and probably sooner than anyone had expected. Lisa immediately called Maya to the medical bay and showed her the scans Maya studied, the images, and understood what this meant. The habitat in the cargo bay would not be large enough once the dragons could fly. They needed to find a permanent home for these creatures, and they needed to find it soon. Hannah had been researching possible locations for weeks. She presented several options, but one stood out above the others. New Terra was a colony world with vast wilderness areas and minimal population. The planet had mountains and forests and open skies perfect for flying. The colonial governor had expressed interest in having the dragons settle there. The colonists believed the dragons could help protect them from the dangerous predators that roamed the wilderness. Maya liked the idea, but she wanted to make sure it was right for the dragons. She spent that evening in the habitat talking to them about it. She used simple words and pictures to explain what a planet was and what home meant. Ember seemed excited by the images of open spaces. Nova appeared interested in the idea of having territory to protect. Ash studied the pictures carefully and made a sound that Lisa translated as, when Maya promised they would go as soon as it was safe. But first she needed to get approval from the administration, and that approval was not going to come easily. The next message from Earth Colonial Administration was much more direct. They ordered Maya to proceed immediately to Station Omega-7. The tone made it clear this was not a request, but a command. Maya sat in her ready room, staring at the message for a long time. She thought about her career and everything she had worked for. She had graduated top of her class at the academy. She had served with distinction for 15 years. She had earned her command through hard work and dedication. Refusing this order would end all of that. But when she closed her eyes, she saw Silvara's final message. She heard the elf woman's plea to protect these innocent lives. She remembered the first time Ember had said Amy's name, and the joy on Amy's face. She thought about Nova standing guard over her siblings with fierce devotion. She recalled Ash's curiosity and intelligence and endless questions. Maya made her choice. She composed a response to the administration declining their order, explained that the dragons were sapient beings and deserved to have their welfare put first. She stated that taking them to a research facility would violate their rights. She offered her resignation effective immediately if the administration insisted on this course, but she would not deliver these babies to a laboratory. She sent the message and then called her senior staff to the ready room. She told them what she had done and offered them a chance to request transfers. No one needed to sacrifice their career for her decision. Amy laughed and said she had been planning to resign anyway if the dragons were taken. Hannah admitted she had already drafted her own resignation letter. Lisa simply said that some things mattered more than careers. Maya felt grateful to have such a crew. The next 48 hours were tense as they waited for a response. The crew continued their routines, but everyone was on edge. Then Admiral Patricia Wells herself sent a priority message directly to Maya. The Admiral had fought hard with the administration on their behalf. She had called in favors and made promises, and essentially bullied the bureaucrats into seeing reason. The dragons would be granted protected status as sapient beings. They would be placed under human guardianship on New Terra colony. Maya and her crew would oversee the relocation and settlement, and Maya's resignation was officially rejected. The Admiral ended her message with a personal note. She said that courage like Maya's was rare, and the fleet needed more officers who would do what was right. Maya gathered her crew and shared the good news. The celebration in the cargo bay habitat that night included both humans and dragons. Ember flew for the first time that evening. His wings were still small, but they carried him 3 feet off the ground for about 10 seconds. He landed with a thump and immediately tried again. Nova watched carefully and then attempted flight herself. She managed 5 feet of height and 15 seconds of air. Ash waited until her siblings were done, and then flew smoothly across the entire habitat. She had apparently been practicing in secret. The Horizon set course for New Terra colony. The dragons were going home. The Horizon emerged from faster-than-light travel at the edge of the New Terra system. and Captain Maya Torres felt a mixture of excitement and sadness. This journey had changed everyone aboard, and saying goodbye to the dragons would be harder than she had expected. New Terra appeared on the view screen as a beautiful blue and green world with 2 small moons. The planet had been colonized 15 years ago, and now supported a population of about 50,000 humans. Most lived in the main settlement near the equator, but smaller communities dotted the continents. Lieutenant Hannah Price brought up data about the planet's environment and shared it with the crew. New Terra had oxygen-rich atmosphere and comfortable temperatures year-round. The northern continent had mountain ranges that stretched for hundreds of miles. Dense forests covered the valleys, and crystal-clear rivers wound through the landscape. It was perfect dragon territory. Governor Helen Martinez contacted the Horizon as soon as they entered orbit. She appeared on the communication screen with a warm smile and genuine enthusiasm. She told Maya that the entire colony was excited about the dragon's arrival. They had prepared a sanctuary in the northern mountains far from any settlements. The area had caves for shelter and plenty of wildlife for hunting, once the dragons were old enough. Governor Martinez had also arranged for a team of xenobiologists and wildlife experts to help with the transition. Maya thanked her and said they would begin landing procedures the next day. That evening, the crew gathered in the cargo bay habitat for a final meal. Together with the dragons, Ember had grown substantially in the past month, and his wingspan now measured almost 6 feet. He could fly across the entire habitat and had developed impressive agility in the air. Nova was even larger, with scales that gleamed like polished silver under the lights. She had become incredibly protective and still positioned herself between any perceived threats, and her siblings. Ash had grown the least in size but the most in communication skills. She could now form complete sentences and held actual conversations with the crew. Dr. Lisa Morgan sat with Ash and discussed what the dragon remembered about her homeworld. Ash's memories were fragmented because she had been very young when Silvara took her from Thessera, but she remembered warm sunshine and the sound of other dragons calling to each other. She remembered feeling safe before everything changed. Lisa listened with tears in her eyes and promised that New Terra would become a new home, where Ash could feel safe again. Corporal Amy Zhang had Ember curled up next to her as usual. The little red-scaled dragon had his head resting on her lap and made contented chirping sounds. Amy stroked his scales gently and tried not to think about how much she would miss these daily visits. Ember sensed her sadness and lifted his head to look at her with those intelligent, golden eyes. He said her name softly and then added the word family. Amy completely broke down crying and hugged him carefully. Lieutenant Hannah Price sat with Nova and showed her images of the mountains on New Terra. Nova studied each picture carefully and asked questions about the terrain. She wanted to know about potential dangers and where the best vantage points would be. Hannah realized Nova was already planning how to defend her territory. The strategic thinking was remarkable for such a young creature. Captain Maya moved between the groups and spent time with each dragon. She had grown attached to all 3 and felt the weight of responsibility for their future. These babies had lost everything and trusted humans to give them a chance at life. Maya was determined to make sure New Terra became more than just a place to live. It needed to become home. The next morning, landing shuttles began ferrying equipment and supplies to the surface. The sanctuary site was located in a valley surrounded by tall peaks. Natural caves dotted the mountainsides, and a large lake provided fresh water. The xenobiology team had set up a base camp nearby, but not too close. They understood the dragons needed space. Dr. Lisa insisted on making the first trip down with the dragons. She wanted to be there when they first set foot on solid ground outside a spaceship. Amy and Hannah volunteered to come along as familiar faces. Maya decided to pilot the shuttle herself. The dragons were nervous during the descent. They had never experienced atmospheric flight before, and the turbulence made them anxious. Ember pressed close to Amy, while Nova kept her eyes fixed on the viewports. Ash remained calm, but her tail wrapped tightly around Lisa's arm. When the shuttle finally touched down and the doors opened, the dragons froze. Air rushed in, carrying scents they had never encountered before. It smelled of pine trees and fresh water and soil and growing things. Ember took the first tentative step down the ramp. His claws touched grass for the first time, and he stopped to examine it. Then he took another step and another until he was standing fully outside. Nova followed with her head up and alert scanning for any threats. Ash came last, moving slowly and taking in everything, with careful observation. The dragons spread their wings and felt real wind for the first time in their lives. Ember suddenly launched himself into the air and flew higher than he ever had before. He climbed 50 feet, and then 100, and then 200. His joyful roars echoed off the mountain walls. Nova took off after him, and the two dragons soared together in wide circles. Ash waited a moment longer and then joined her siblings. The three dragons flew together over their new home. Maya watched. From the ground, with her hand shading her eyes from the sun, she felt profound relief that they had made it this far. The xenobiology team approached carefully and introduced themselves. The lead scientist was a woman named Dr. Kate Wilson, who had studied dragon-like creatures on other worlds. She assured Maya that they would monitor the dragons from a distance and only intervene if absolutely necessary. The goal was to let them develop naturally while ensuring their safety over. The next 2 weeks, the crew of the Horizon helped the dragons settle into their new environment. They taught Ember how to hunt by releasing small animals in controlled situations. They showed Nova the best lookout points and helped her understand the local geography. They worked with Ash to establish a home cave that was comfortable and secure. The dragons adapted quickly because they were born predators despite being raised by humans. Their instincts kicked in, and they began to thrive in the wilderness. But every evening they would return to the base camp for a visit. They would land near the shelters and call out for their human family. Amy always ran to greet Ember first. Hannah would sit with Nova and discuss what the dragon had discovered. That day, Lisa would check on Ash's health and listen to her observations about the ecosystem. Maya would share a meal with them and tell stories about the stars on. The final night before the Horizon was scheduled to leave, the entire crew came down to the surface. They built a large bonfire and gathered around it with the dragons. It was a celebration and a farewell. Ember flew overhead doing aerial tricks he had invented. Nova stood guard at the edge of the firelight, keeping watch. Ash sat close to the flames and spoke about gratitude and family. She thanked the crew for saving them and raising them and giving them this beautiful home. She said that dragons never forgot kindness. She promised that humans would always be welcome in their territory. Amy tried to stay strong, but eventually the tears came. She hugged Ember one last time and told him to stay safe. Ember nuzzled against her and promised he would. Hannah gave Nova a small tracking beacon so they could always find each other. Nova accepted it like a sacred trust. Lisa gave Ash a datapad loaded with information about Earth and humanity. Ash promised to study it and remember where she came from. Maya stood before all three dragons and spoke from her heart. She told them they were not pets, or specimens, or research subjects. They were individuals with the right to live free and make their own choices. She told them that Silvara would be proud of what they had become. She said that humans were honored to have played a part in their survival. Dragons responded by lowering their heads in a gesture of respect. Then they lifted their voices together in a song that rang through the mountains. It was beautiful and haunting and filled with emotion. The crew listened in silence as the dragon song continued. When it finally ended, Ember spoke for all three. He said that humans had proven themselves worthy of trust and friendship. He said that this bond between their species would last forever. He said that New Terra was home, but the Horizon crew would always be family. Maya smiled through her tears and agreed. The next morning, the Horizon lifted off from New Terra and returned to its survey mission. But nothing would ever be quite the same for the crew who had raised 3 dragons. 3 years passed quickly in the vast expanse of space as the Horizon continued its survey missions across different sectors. Captain Maya Torres had led her crew through dozens of successful operations, but she never stopped thinking about the 3 dragons they had left on New Terra. Every few months she would receive updates from Governor Helen Martinez about how the dragons were doing. The reports were always positive, but reading about them was not the same as seeing them. Ember had grown into a magnificent creature with wingspan measuring 40 feet across. His red and purple scales gleamed in the sunlight, and he had become the fastest flyer of the 3. He spent his days soaring through the mountain valleys and had claimed the highest peak as his personal territory. Nova had become even larger than her brother, with silver scales that could be seen from miles away. She had taken it upon herself to protect the colonists from dangerous predators that sometimes came down from the northern ranges. The settlers called her their guardian angel. Ash had grown into a deep thinker who spent much of her time exploring and studying the world around her. She had learned to read human books and would visit the colony library once a week to exchange materials. The colonists adored her gentle nature and sharp mind. Lieutenant Hannah Price monitored every message from New Terra and kept detailed records of the dragon's development. She had published several papers about their remarkable intelligence and adaptability. The scientific community was fascinated, but Maya had made sure that New Terra's location remained classified. She would not risk researchers descending on the planet and disturbing the dragon's peace. Corporal Amy Zhang had been promoted to lieutenant and now served as the Horizon's chief of security, but she still kept a picture of herself with Ember displayed on her desk. She talked about him often and made no secret of how much she missed the little dragon who had bonded with her. Dr. Lisa Morgan had continued her research into dragon biology and published a comprehensive guide for their care. She hoped it would help if humans ever encountered similar creatures in their explorations, but she also knew that the 3 dragons on New Terra were unique and special in ways that went beyond their species. The crew had changed in other ways too. The experience of raising the dragons had brought them closer together. They had learned that compassion and courage mattered more than following orders. They had discovered that family could be formed across species barriers, and they had proven that humans were capable of putting others' needs before their own interests. Maya had been promoted to commander and offered a position at fleet headquarters. She had turned it down because she wanted to stay on the Horizon. The ship felt like home, and her crew felt like family. Besides, she had a feeling they might be needed again someday. That feeling proved correct. When the Horizon received an emergency message from New Terra, Governor Martinez's voice was tense as she explained the situation. A merchant vessel had crash-landed in the northern wilderness 3 days ago. Search and rescue teams had been unable to reach the site because of a severe storm system. The ship's distress beacon was still active, which meant survivors might be alive. But they were in dragon territory, and the governor wanted to make sure there would not be any conflicts. Maya immediately ordered the Horizon to New Terra at maximum speed. The crew buzzed with excitement at the prospect of seeing the dragons again, but Maya reminded them this was a rescue mission and had to take priority. When they arrived in orbit, the storm was still raging over the northern continent. Maya studied the weather data and determined it was too dangerous for a standard approach. They would need to wait for the storm to pass, but waiting meant survivors might die, and Maya was not willing to accept that. She called Hannah and Amy to her ready room and asked if they thought the dragons might be able to help. Hannah pulled up her research on dragon capabilities. Their strength and flight abilities would allow them to operate in conditions that grounded human aircraft. Amy added that the dragons knew that terrain better than anyone. If the survivors were in their territory, the dragons would know exactly where to look. Maya made the decision to ask. She took a shuttle down through the storm with Hannah and Amy. The ride was rough, and several times Maya thought they might not make it, but she pushed through and landed near the Sanctuary Valley. The dragons appeared within minutes of their arrival. They must have sensed the shuttle coming through the storm. Ember landed first with a ground-shaking thump and immediately ran to Amy. He was enormous now, but still greeted her with the same affection he had shown as a baby. Amy hugged his massive head and felt tears of joy. Nova descended more carefully and approached Hannah with dignity, but her eyes showed warmth and recognition. She pressed her head against Hannah's shoulder. Gently, Ash glided down and went straight to Lisa, who had insisted on coming along. The doctor ran her hands over Ash's scales, checking for any signs of injury or illness. Ash tolerated the examination patiently and then said she was fine. Maya stepped forward, and the 3 dragons turned their attention to her. She bowed respectfully and explained the situation. There were humans in danger somewhere in the mountains. The storm made it impossible for human rescuers to reach them. She was asking if the dragons would be willing to help. Ember responded immediately and said they would find the humans. Nova added that protecting those who could not protect themselves was important. Ash asked for the exact coordinates of the distress beacon. Hannah provided them, and Ash studied the information carefully. She said she knew that area, and there was a canyon that might provide shelter from the storm. The dragons took flight immediately without waiting for further discussion. Maya watched them disappear into the storm clouds and felt both hope and worry. The crew returned to the shuttle and monitored the situation from there for 3 hours. They waited without any word. Then finally Ember's voice came through the communication system. He reported they had found the crashed ship. There were 4 survivors huddled in the wreckage. 2 were injured, but all were alive. The dragons had created a windbreak with their bodies to protect the survivors from the storm. They needed human medical help as soon as possible. Lisa immediately prepared her medical kit. Maya contacted the Horizon and ordered the ship to send down a medical team. Within 30 minutes, a heavily equipped rescue shuttle fought its way through the storm to the coordinates Ember provided. What they found was remarkable. The 3 dragons had positioned themselves around the crashed ship, forming a living shelter. There, wings spread wide to block the wind, and their bodies provided warmth. Inside this protected space, the 4 survivors huddled together. They were cold and scared, but alive thanks to the dragons. The medical team worked quickly to stabilize the injured Lisa, coordinated the treatment while Amy and Hannah helped load survivors onto the rescue shuttle. The dragons maintained their protective positions until every human was safely aboard. Then they escorted the shuttle back through the storm, ensuring it did not crash when everyone was safely on the ground. Governor Martinez arrived with half the colony following her. The story of what the dragons had done spread quickly. The colonists, who had already loved their guardian dragons, now saw them as heroes. Maya stood with her crew and the dragons watching the celebration. She realized this was exactly what Silvara had hoped for. The elf woman had not just wanted the dragons to survive. She had wanted them to thrive and find purpose and form connections with others. These 3 dragons had done all of that and more. That evening, the Horizon crew gathered with the dragons one more time. They sat around a fire and shared stories about the past 3 years. Ember told Amy about learning to fly in thunderstorms. Nova described to Hannah the first time she had scared off a predator. Threatening the colony, Ash showed Lisa her collection of books and discussed philosophy. Maya listened and felt profound satisfaction. They had saved 3 babies who had lost everything. Those babies had grown into remarkable beings who now saved others. The circle was complete. Before leaving, Maya asked the dragons if they needed anything. Ember said they had everything they needed here on New Terra Nova, added that they had purpose protecting. The colonists, Ash stated that they had knowledge to gain and wisdom to develop, but all 3 agreed on one thing. They said that humans would always be their family. They said the Horizon crew had given them more than life. They had given them love, and that was something dragons never forgot. Maya promised to visit as often as duties allowed. She said that Earthfleet was establishing a permanent base on New Terra. There would always be humans here who cared about the dragons. The next morning, the Horizon prepared to depart. Emmy said goodbye to Ember, knowing it would not be forever. Hannah left Nova with a promise to return. Soon Lisa gave Ash new books to study, and Maya stood before all 3 dragons. One final time. She told them she was proud of what they had become. She said Silvara's sacrifice had not been in vain. She declared that the bond between humans and dragons would stand as an example to the galaxy. Sometimes the greatest strength was not in weapons or technology. Sometimes the greatest strength was in choosing compassion over convenience, in protecting the helpless even when it was difficult, in forming family bonds across the boundaries of species. The dragons lifted their voices in song. It echoed across the mountains and up to the stars.